Okay, let's make a start. So, good morning, everyone. My name is Richard Baker, partner at EY, and I'm chair of the Thames Valley Sustainability Working Group. Welcome to today's webcast, our first initiative really that we've opened up to a wider audience in the region, and really with the aim of supporting the business community in the region on your sustainability and net zero journeys. Something that is critical, as we all know, for the continued economic success of the region, as well as, of course, the wider planet and societal impact. We do appreciate everyone is at different stages on the journey, so we're really keen to hear your feedback today, particularly around views on how the region can accelerate its journey, but what you would most value as the business community from the Sustainability Working Group going forward. So please keep those questions in mind as you listen to the speakers. Please also take the opportunity to ask any questions that you like. Please put those into the chat as we're going along. We'll have a Q&A session near the end, and we will pick up those questions and pick up any others after the event if we don't get to answer them. I'll be back later in the session to hear your views to those two questions, but I'm now going to hand over to Gareth to give you a little more background to the Sustainability Working Group. Gareth.
Thank you, Richard, and good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining the Sustainable Working Group event today. Let's ship out a bit of a background to the Sustainable Working Group. It's an initiative set up by the Thames Valley Chamber of Commerce in partnership with a number of founding partners in the region, and I will give a name check to those companies to start with. Those founding partners to the group include The Perfect Process, Thames Water, Microsoft, Seagrow, Royal Holloway, University Bayer, University of Reading, Cellnex, Johnson & Johnson, Rollbarks Hospital, Ethical Reading, Mapletree, Honda, Heathrow, and a special thanks to EY, who are helping to really drive this forward. This is a business-led initiative which came out of discussions coming out of two Windsor debates. We had an unprecedented double header in terms of sustainability in 2021. Back in March 2021, we had an initiative promoting intelligent climate planning, decarbonisation at speed, where we launched and shared with everybody EY's Sustainability 101 report, more of that later. And then in September, we had a second sustainability event around strengthening digital and physical infrastructure to support the region's future sustainable economic growth and innovation. Coming out of that were a number of key messages which went into Her Majesty's government and also went into our local MP, who also happens to be COP26 President-elect Sharma. And we continue to send those messages to government in terms of the message coming out of this part of the world. The third key message was for us to set up a group and really start to move forward with this initiative. And as you can see on the slide there, I'm not intending to read the slide. You can all read that for you. But this business-led initiative developing three principal drivers around the purpose, objective, and ambition. I just want to sort of highlight a couple of the aspects there that we want to talk about. In terms of the purpose, it's bring together thought leadership and bring together those businesses that are driving this agenda to shape a response from this region. And certainly it echoed to me that the Thames Valley region 40 years ago was at the cusp of driving the technology sector. And the initial meetings we've had with those founding partners said we should be doing something similar with green technology and this challenge around decarbonisation. It's about a common strategy, and that's our ambition to share best practice and share the understanding around the region and bring that towards a common strategy for the Thames Valley. And then it's about practical advice and guidance to a pathway to net zero. The other ambition is, objective, is to try and develop a comparable set of metrics that we can all look at and share and build upon. And that will be part of a checklist, which again we'll be announcing a little bit later on in today's session. Next slide, if I may, Ben. So what have we been developing? As Richard said, this is the first sort of really public sort of event, but we've had a lot of groups meetings previously to this, and we've come up with quite a detailed work program, which will be available and is available on the Chamber's website. I think the important aspects of this program is that we recognise there are three pillars to sustainability: the ESG, the environment, social, and governance. We've decided just at this stage to look and focus on the environment and decarbonisation aspects of it. That doesn't mean we're ignoring the others, but we're just trying to focus on that. linked into this work programme, a couple of areas I just want to highlight. The practical pathway, we're going to talk about that later with the checklist, but the case studies and the showcasing good practice. This is about a portal of information sharing for our business community and our wider stakeholders, be that government, be that local authorities and others. And I think the other aspect is around the corporate leaders and the industry leaders. We wanted to try and shape and come together around a couple of initiatives, and we can see those there. Beacon initiatives are a number of big programs in terms of greening the business community, for example, that we want to look at, and greening the built environment, and working strongly with our small business and micro business community, who are also the innovators in this area, in this region. So it's a challenging time for us. We accept that, we recognise that, and as Richard said, everybody's on a journey, and everybody's at a different place on that journey. The SWG and the work programme that we're developing is aimed at doing that. And part of what we want to try is get you think, and there are a range of levers that we can pull as businesses, and these are some of the sort of the thinking modes that we want to try and develop and shape around our work programme and getting you thinking today. And hopefully in the boardrooms of your companies, you will begin to think around how we can contribute to this agenda and changing some of the aspects of work practices. But without further ado, I think let's get on to the main aspect of it. Really a great opportunity to share with everybody today, and thank you again for those participants presenting today, and also for you to joining us. So thank you.
Great stuff. Thank you, Gareth. Can I just check, Gareth, that you can hear me before
I can indeed, yes.
Thank you very much. So lovely to be with you all today. By way of introduction, my name is Ben Morrison, and I work at Ernst & Young, EY, alongside Richard, who you heard from up front. And in terms of what I do, I normally describe that EY is a huge organisation, a lot of people, a lot of resources, it offers a lot of services to businesses and has quite a lot of influence. I don't say that in any way to show off, but I'm in quite a fortunate position that it's my job to help EY to use all of that influence, all of that clout, that brand, all its services, to try and accelerate the pace at which business is moving to becoming more sustainable, and accelerating the pace that business is moving towards net zero. So tricky job, very enjoyable, feels quite meaningful. I'm a total sustainability nut. I kind of live and breathe this stuff, so any opportunity to have an audience and to speak to people like you, I'm all over. And it's my job today to facilitate this session and to keep us kind of moving and introducing all of the great speakers that we've got. We've got quite a lot of variety, a lot of interaction within this session, but keep it moving in a way that makes sure that you get the maximum out of this session. So I know lots of you would have joined with different motivations in mind. Just to be clear, there's a couple of key outcomes that we're working towards here. The first is engagement on this topic, so sustainability and what that means for you as business leaders, but also more specifically the issue of climate and your progress towards net zero. But then crucially, that second output, as Richard and Gareth have pointed to, we are looking to set up a community of like-minded people and businesses that can work towards big goals together. And we believe that a community should be formed and set up and organised by those who form part of it. So we will leave time in today for Q&A, for feedback through various mechanisms, and to get your steer really, so that we can shape what happens after this session. In terms of what to expect, the agenda, there's a few parts to it. So we'll give a bit of the broad context about sustainability, and then a deeper dive into climate. And we have a climate quiz on some key terms. You can see a QR code in the bottom right of the screen there. If you want to be well prepared, you can get your phone out now, get your camera out and hover it over that QR code. It will open up a link to Mentimeter that when we get to that section, we'll kind of have you in the right place where you need to be. If you don't manage to do that before I flick on, don't worry, I'll flash the QR code up again just before we get to that. We will then, as Gareth talked about, case studies and understanding and sharing good practice and progress is a key part of what we're looking to do. So we'll have a section that describes some of the what and some of the steps that you can take towards net zero through some case studies. So we've got 4 businesses or 4 leaders from businesses coming in to talk, which is the Perfect Process Company, Turley, the University College of Estates Management, and Syngenta, and that will be facilitated by another EY colleague on the call, Kate Allen. And then we'll get into lots of your Q&A, your feedback. We'll run some polls and we'll have some good discussion about what a community could look like, what benefits you want to get from it, and how motivated really you are to form part of something like that. So to make sure that runs smoothly and we can refer to questions throughout, make sure you are asking them as and when they come up for you. Represent your perspective. If things pop into your head, pop it into the chat, and we'll manage that and we'll come to those as we go through the call. So that's what we're here to do. Before we do deep dive into the topic of climate, I always think it's useful, because climate is a specific sustainability issue, often the most urgent or the most important one. But I think it makes sense to position it within a broader context. And that context is some of the biggest global collective challenges that we face as humans, and two of those challenges being our use of the planet's resources and degradation of the planet, climate change, and then also the broadening social inequalities and ensuring that every person on Earth has the kind of basic foundations, basic social foundations for a good life. Those are two huge collective challenges that we face that are kind of widening as opposed to getting better in a lot of cases. And business over the years has been one of the, if not the biggest contributor to these challenges. For lots of the time, certainly on the planetary side, we haven't necessarily known any better, although we have done now for quite a considerable amount of time. And business has been set up, a lot of businesses have been set up in a way that doesn't really account for or integrate some of these challenges into how it operates. So when we talk about climate and when we talk about changes, transformations that business need to make, it's within these two global challenges, which brings us into the question of what is sustainability and how do you describe it? If you were to Google that question, what is sustainability, you get a huge variety of responses. I've included a couple at the top there that I really like and that I use quite a lot. I like the top one because it really points to the fact that as businesses, business leaders and people in general at the moment, we have a responsibility to preserve and even enhance what is great about Earth and how we live on it for future generations. And the second one that's just below that top line was a real game changer for me to start to think in these terms. And that game changer is that sustainability should be a noun rather than a verb. So it's not something that you do, it's not an initiative that you put into place that then makes you sustainable as a business. Sustainability is a state that exists outside of any one company where a business is operating in a way that is within planetary boundaries, so you're not taking or exploiting more than you are giving back. And when you understand that, yes, you do sustainability, but you're looking to get to a certain point in time that is objective. So actually, there's probably very few truly sustainable businesses, but we're all working towards it together. To move into some business speak at the bottom in terms of how businesses talk about sustainability, it's a very confusing landscape, lots and lots of acronyms and strange terminology. One that's most popular, and Gareth pointed to this earlier, is ESG, or environmental, social and governance. And this is essentially three areas of focus that categorize or group together lots of important sustainability related topics. What you focus on as a business will depend on what you do and what you have the power to influence and the kind of impact that you're having on the world. There's lots of ways that businesses talk about, think about, integrate sustainability into how they operate. Here is just a few of them, but the main point is that there's lots of support and there's lots of things that you can align to as you start to become more sustainable. So we've got the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which enables businesses to connect to and contribute to big global goals that other businesses will be contributing to also. We have triple bottom line, which is kind of represents the move that business is making from an old shareholder primacy or shareholder first model of doing business, where profit is ultimately the sole purpose of why a business exists, to more of a stakeholder focused model where considerations in relation to people and planet are considered alongside profit. The B Corp certification might be something that's hit your radar. There's a lot of value in this or in exploring this for small and medium-sized businesses, but that's very much a certification that aligns with that stakeholder model. It's one of the more valued accreditations that you can get. It's quite hard to achieve, and achieving it means that you are operating towards or in a very sustainable way. The model on the right is referred to as the donut, from a book called Donut Economics by Kate Raworth, and it combines the idea of planetary boundaries and a social foundation, and that a business needs to consider and act within a remit where you're not exploiting either of those two things. And then bottom right is just reference to the fact that there's a lot more, an increasing amount of governmental support for businesses to transition and operate in a more conscious, sustainable way. And there's legislations coming in thick and fast at the moment that is either forcing or supporting businesses to conform with that. Ultimately, what we're looking at here is a move away from business as usual, this kind of shareholder primacy way of doing things, and doing a bit of sustainability or corporate social responsibility on the side, i.e. maybe having a separate sustainability strategy, to a model where sustainability is built into how you operate as a business, into all of the decisions you make, all your processes, every department, so that as you grow, your impact becomes more positive, and you almost don't need to think about it as something separate anymore. So that's what we're moving towards. Part of my role at EY is speaking to lots of businesses and trying to support them from where they are right now to turning the dial and becoming more sustainable. And how I'd summarize where business is at, both the SME community and larger businesses, is that it's totally mainstream to talk about sustainability. It's kind of against the grain not to at the moment. Most companies strategize about sustainability, they talk about it a lot, but it's still not commonly applied necessarily, and there's lots of reasons for that. The second point is that we're at a point in time, and this is where we get lots of hope from, where it makes business sense from a commercial perspective to be more sustainable at the moment. People prefer working for organizations who have positive impact, customers prefer buying from them. There's lots of areas of economic opportunity as the UK and the world transitions to a more sustainable economy, more of a carbon-free net zero economy. So we're at a time where it makes sense, and you'll start to be left behind commercially if you're not moving to becoming more sustainable. And then last thing to say is that sustainability is a very broad topic. There's a lot of issues that fall under that banner, lots of them you've seen on a previous slide. Consistently, climate and net zero scores highest, and most consistently across most businesses' priorities to do something about. And that's again more rationale why we're focusing on this specific topic right now. So we're going to move from that broad context setting around sustainability to more of a deep dive around climate. So we're going to spend a few minutes just kind of level setting and covering some of the science. I'm going to hand over in a few minutes to Dylan Parks from the University of Reading to give a kind of 5-minute brief overview on our changing climate. Before we do that, I did point earlier to a short quiz that we're going to get the chance to do. So this is on some climate terminology, and this certainly isn't to make anyone feel silly. It's more to land the point that this is quite a confusing landscape, and actually, does anybody really know the terms and what we're doing? So get your phone out if you haven't already, scan the QR code. If you're struggling, you can go to menti.com and put in that code. And in a second, I will seamlessly transition over to the Mentimeter to get you going with the quiz. And perhaps one of the other hosts can snip this QR code and put it into the chat, just in case anyone has missed the boat initially. Right, I can see a lot of players, which is fantastic. I'll give it another minute just for a few more to join. You would have had the chance to pick a name, so when the leaderboard pops up, we'll see what names you've chosen for yourselves. You can still join on that QR code as we are going through, so don't worry if you miss the start. I can see 23 players. Hosts, feel free to join in as well. We've lost a player. We've been joined by football. I'm just going to give it 5 more seconds and then we'll kick off. Okay, so 4 questions. The faster you answer, the more points you get, the more likely you are to get to the top of the leaderboard. First question is, which of the following is not a greenhouse gas? Options are carbon dioxide, water vapor, methane, or carbon monoxide. So get your answer in if you haven't already. There we go. 3 out of, what's that, 25 got the answer right. So we didn't say this was going to be easy and was expecting this one to catch a lot of people out. So the answer is carbon monoxide. A greenhouse gas is so called because it traps heat in the Earth's atmosphere and contributes towards heating the climate. Carbon dioxide, which you all knew was a greenhouse gas, accounts for about 75% of all greenhouse gas emissions from human activities. Water vapor is actually the world's most abundant greenhouse gas, and it's carbon monoxide on that list that isn't one. Question 2. Oh, we have the leaderboard. So some people have used their real names. Heavenator, not only did you get it right, you got it right in an extremely fast time. Okay, still time to catch up. Question 2. So when a business offsets an equivalent amount of carbon for the amount it produces, it's achieved what state? Is it climate positive, carbon neutral, net zero, or zero carbon? And the majority of you got that one right. Well done. So these terms can be extremely confusing. There's a lot of crossover. But carbon neutral essentially means balancing the carbon emissions with offsetting measures where an organisation can't reduce its carbon emissions to zero within its own operations. Climate positive, also referred to as carbon negative, just to make things even more confusing, is when an organisation reaches a point when they have a net effect of removing more carbon from the atmosphere than they emit. Net zero is the probably mostly used term at the moment. It goes beyond just carbon. Net zero is a state where you have removed all greenhouse gases from your operations. Question 3, so we've got 2 to go. So COP26, that was in November last year, the UK government set the world's most ambitious climate change target to reduce emissions by 50% by 2030, 50% by 2050, 78% by 2035, or 78% by 2050. And not many got that right. I'm not surprised. So the UK is leading on several fronts when it comes to climate. It's also falling behind on some others. But yes, this is the goal. And UK became the first economy to entrench its goal within law, which actually set them up for a lawsuit this year as well, as they were taken to the High Court, who ruled that there wasn't enough detail in order. It was too vague, essentially, the pathway to get to net zero, and that they have 6 months or so to shore that up, which is being done at the moment. And the final question, by the end of 2023, all listed companies, so 3,000 or so listed companies in the UK are going to be legally required to state which year they will achieve net zero by, required to have a chief sustainability officer on their board, to have switched to using a minimum of 50% of renewable energy or have an independently certified net zero transition plan. And the majority of you got that right. Well done. So this is regulation that's referred to as the TPT, the Transition Plan Task Force. So they put out to businesses a consultation process not long ago, and they're going to launch what the guidance looks like that businesses have to follow at COP27 in November. And this will be significant not only for the 3,000 or so businesses it affects, but also for SMEs who form part of those listed company supply chains, because those listed companies will need to understand and have a plan for removing emissions from their supply chains. So Evernator, congratulations, you led from the start, you led throughout, and that is a very impressive score. So as I mentioned, the intention there was not to make anyone feel silly. It's a very confusing landscape. We all have a lot to learn, and that should not stop us engaging on the topic. I will hand over to Dylan now from the University of Reading, just to give a little bit more detail on the changing climate and a bit of the science. So Dylan, over to you.
Thank you, Ben. So yes, my name is Dylan Parks. I'm head of strategic engagement around climate and environmental sustainability at the University of Reading. So full confession, I'm not a climate scientist myself, but I work very closely with many colleagues who are very eminent in that field. And yeah, I've got the challenging task of kind of reminding us, I guess, in some cases, or setting the scene around a high level overview of the changing climate and the importance of the world dramatically reducing its climate changing emissions. And this is something at the university that we are very much at the forefront of in terms of climate science and research around understanding what the projections are and what the impacts may be. And in fact, much of the scientific information relied on by government comes from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which produces regular reports which summarize the leading climate science and understanding from around the world. Led by the UN, and the last year's report was presented to world leaders in advance of COP26, of course, where they debated a lot of the actions we need to take. And actually, the University of Reading has more lead contributors to that report than any other UK institution. So very much something that we're concerned about, something that we're very much trying to help others think about and communicate and address. And maybe, Ben, if we can go to my slides, please. I shall use these to give us all maybe a reminder or a very high level overview of what the science currently tells us.
Can you not see that, Dylan?
I can't see the slides now.
Okay, let's go again.
Okay, I still can't see them, so not to worry. I mean, I'll try and imagine which slides are on the screen each time and prompt Ben to make sure we're on the right one. So forgive us if there's a big back and forth to make sure that we're aligned. So hopefully we're on a slide at the moment that shows something like this, the climate stripes graphic, which many of you may have seen. It's it's popping up in all sorts of places at the moment and is a good starting point for a conversation about climate. This is a graphic that was developed by Professor Ed Hawkins here at the university a few years ago and is now being adopted or communicated all around the world. And it shows very clearly the warming trend over the last 150 years. So if you can see the graphic, each of the lines, the bars from left to right, represent a year in that period. And essentially, if you take the average temperature across that period, the bluer lines show a year where the average temperature globally was cooler than the average, and the redder lines towards the right show where the average temperature globally was higher than the average for that period. And it's pretty obvious the transition, from blue to red across the screen shows that warming trend. And if you go down to the next slide, which I think is probably a more traditional graph that shows a very similar set of data and a very similar warming trend that we're experiencing. So and the science is very clear about that. Great consensus around the trend that we're seeing overall. and of course more and more projections and scenarios showing how red those stripes might get as we move forward. So if we can move on to the next slide. Again, another sort of slightly alarming slide, this one from the Met Office. So closer to home in the UK, of the 10 hottest days that we have on record, 9 of them have been since 1990. And in fact, 4 of the top 5 hottest days have been the last 3 years. And of course, the hottest day of all was the one that we reached this summer, where we saw temperature records exceed 40 degrees for the first time. During that heat wave in July, which I'm sure many of you experienced and saw what a dramatic impact that had on us all, as we seemed to almost go back down into lockdown, staying at home, staying indoors, closing schools because the temperature was so extreme. And of course, looking at the news these days, you'll be hard pressed, I think, to find a news bulletin that didn't feature at least one example of an extreme weather event happening somewhere in the world. And in fact, the last IPCC report was the first to directly link current or recent extreme weather events with the impact of climate change. I think for years, climate change models were kind of anticipating and warning us that such events would become more severe and more frequent. But last year's update to that scientific report made direct links with current extreme weather events, whether that's heat waves or droughts or forest fires or hurricanes or floods. All of these regularly dominating the news headlines, and weather records and impacts regularly being broken all around the world. So that's kind of the trajectory we're on in very broad terms. If we can go to the next slide, please. So of course, it's clear now that it's human activity that is driving this warming through the buildup of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, mainly through burning fossil fuels. And the key challenge is how do we reduce the severity of climate change by dramatically reducing those. And this graph shows different scenarios as to where we might end up on different carbon pathways. So the black line, I can't control the cursor, but the black line that shows sort of period up till now clearly shows year on year dramatic increase in global carbon emissions. And then from there, it branches off into some different scenarios and kind of working down from the top. I think policies and action essentially means things that are happening at the moment, things that are definitely in place in terms of approaches we might take. And that leads us on the trajectory that we'll see a sort of 2.5 to 2.9 degree increase by the year in global temperature on average by the end of the century. Then below that, we have the purple line is kind of based primarily on things that are in place around targets with a shorter time frame around 2030, and that helps a little bit, gets us down to 2.4. The next line is around the pledges and targets that are already enshrined in law around the world. And again, that helps, gets us closer to 2 degrees. And then I think the optimistic scenario kind of tries to cover both what's already formalized in various government action around the world and promises that have been made, if not yet formalized. And that gets us to about 1.8. But we've already talked about 1.5 degree being the sort of safe limit that world leaders agreed in the Paris Agreement as being the target we should be aiming for. And there's a great deal of uncertainty around how this will land. But to be confident in avoiding the very worst impacts of climate change, then that 1.5 degree limit is what the world is working towards. And you can see there a trajectory to get to that sees us all reaching net zero by the middle of the century. But more importantly, and I think that red arrow there highlights, it has to start now. And the decline in carbon emissions rather than the continued growth has to happen this decade. And that was a very clear and stark message from COP26. If we don't get on this trajectory now, we will find it very difficult to catch up and keep that warming anywhere near 1.5 degrees. And in some scenarios and some voices already feel that we've blown that one. And so what can we look at next? And it sounds strange when you talk about a difference between a 1.5 degree increase and the 2 degree increase. It doesn't sound that dramatic, does it? But maybe if we go to the next slide, please, I'll pull out a few examples of the difference between some of those scenarios. So this is a slide actually from WWF I used to work for, and therefore has a bit of a focus on biodiversity and impacts on the world. But contrast 1.5 degrees and 2 degrees. So if you look under extreme weather, at the end of the century, there will be 100% increase globally in being affected by a flood risk at the 1.5 degree scenario. So even the 1.5 scenario is not great, but that increases to 170% increase in flood risk at 2 degrees. I won't go through all of them, but you can hopefully see those and see the contrast between the two. Things do escalate by order of magnitude with each half degree of increase in temperature that we anticipate. If you go on to the next slide, hopefully you'll be able to read this one. Text is a bit small, but again, this is drawn from the IPCC report and gives them a range of ways in which either people are already being affected by climate change or maybe in the future, and a number of stats around impacts on food production and food security, impacts on water scarcity, significant migration of people affected either by flooding or by drought, as they can't grow their crops or can't live safely in the environments that they currently live in. Actually, a lot of people don't realize the health impacts that the changing climate will mean. Much more prevalence of tropical diseases, vector-borne diseases will have a greater reach, and of course reach populations that don't have any sort of natural immunity because they're not being a feature of their lives until now. So you might see malaria, for example, appearing regularly in southern Europe because of kind of migrating northwards as temperatures rise. So there's plenty of information out there and scenarios that show very dramatic impacts of climate change, and that's why governments have committed in some cases to doing their bit to reach net zero, and UK government obviously is one of those, having committed to reach net zero by 2050. But as I said, the key thing is actually all eyes are on the rest of this decade. 2030 is now a really key milestone in terms of getting on the path that we need to get to sooner rather than later. Otherwise, we'll just continue to emit more and more carbon and find that we really struggle to catch up, and therefore we get into more and more dramatic scenarios in terms of climate change impact. And that's why many organisations locally actually have adopted their own net zero approach to reach net zero, and that's certainly true of the university where I work. It's also true of Wokingham Borough and Reading as well. Have set themselves net zero targets by 2030, and that tends to be increasingly the case with more and more businesses that we work with or know of. So at the university, if you don't mind going to the next slide, please. Not going to talk too much about this, but this is just a summary of our university strategy, and we have 4 pillars, and sustainability is very much one of them. It's core to our strategy because we understand the problem and the need for that urgent action, and we understand the impact on our community, both locally and globally. So we feel a duty to do everything we can to reduce our own footprint and also help others do the same. And it's something also that our students demand of us or expect of us. People coming to university now have grown up under the shadow of climate change. It's been a feature or something they've been aware of throughout their lives and are very concerned about, and expect to see us do our bit. And they are effectively our customers. And likewise, your customers, whatever area of business you're in, are probably have the same thing in front of mind. And their choices are increasingly being driven by wanting to do the right thing and make the greenest choice. We also mentioned earlier, the government, of course, will need to bring in more and more legislation that will have impacts on all areas of business as it drives us towards decarbonisation. But hopefully, within that, there's also greater investment for innovation, finding greener solutions, creating green jobs. So hopefully there's lots of opportunity too that you want to tap into. So in that context, whatever your area of business and whatever the size of your business, it's time to think about what you need to do to adapt to these changes, but also look for those potential opportunities. If we could just go to the next slide, please, Ben. Just not to labour the point, but these stripes are something that a number of local businesses have adopted as a way of sort of communicating to their audiences that they're committed to doing their bit wherever they are in their set journey. So put out a couple there. Reading Football Club now have the climate stripes on their kit. Done lots of stuff at Reading Festival in the last few years. Reading buses there have got a new gas-powered bus that is working on the routes around Reading, adorning the climate stripes, and that's just symbolic, I think, of more and more businesses engaging in this, wanting to understand more. And of course, our webinar today and talking to and working with colleagues within the chamber and our network are all colluding and drawing together some great guidance that will help you think about these impacts and what needs to be done. So I guess my closing thought, and I'm conscious I've probably gone over 5 minutes, but the way I think about it is that one way or another significant change is coming to all aspects of society because of the changing climate, and either that will be because of the changes that we collectively need to make to work towards transforming to a low carbon economy, or to avoid to avoid the worst potential impacts, or else it will be change forced upon us by the environment changing. And that's when we get into scenarios where there's much more dramatic impacts, not just around the world, but in the UK, that will have significant effect on us. So my message is let's really work together to make these changes at pace that will enable people, our businesses, our community to not only survive in the future, but also thrive as our climate changes. Thank you.
Thank you, Dylan. Thank you for a few things. Firstly, for seamlessly continuing as my computer malfunctioned in the background there. Very skillful. It's great to hear about academic leadership within the region, and for you to kind of talk and show off about that, I think is really important. The more expertise, the more leadership we show within the region, the more kind of there is to join in with, and the more of a noise we can make. And the real benefit in reminding ourselves of the science and the severity of the situation is that it does take understanding of it and acting in accordance with it if we are going to make progress at the pace we need to. Sarah, do you mind continuing to share the slides? Just a bit worried it might kick me off again. So we're going to move into Q&A, thank you, with on the case studies shortly. We talked a bit about sustainability. We talked a bit about net zero and climate. You're all on the call, no doubt, because you're already doing things in relation to this. You have a kind of motivation to do more, and you're trying to help your organizations to do more. To do that, it takes a great deal of both motivation and conviction in what we're doing. So again, I think it's important in terms of positioning to talk about some of that why and some of those messages that you can reinforce in order to help action to move further. The left-hand side there, we've talked a lot about the moral case and the science and the importance of this for us as humans. The middle bit, I get a lot of my conviction, particularly in a place like EY and speaking to businesses about this more economic or commercial case for net zero. I love that quote that the net zero revolution is the biggest business opportunity in human history, particularly for SMEs who find it a little slightly easier to change than big corporations, and to kind of position themselves as leaders in this field. We know that those types of businesses are performing much better. There's more than enough evidence to back that up now. The stronger you perform on climate, the better your business performance, because customers, employees choose you, want to work with you, employees work better, work harder, are more motivated, all that sort of stuff. But then the third point on the right is, as we mentioned, the TPT and the new legislation that's coming out. This is coming whether you want it or not, so it makes sense to get ahead of the curve and to start thinking about some of this. Lots of businesses are acting now because they have to. There's going to be penalties starting to come into play, and finding finance for business who aren't acting in accordance with movement towards net zero are going to start finding it difficult to attain that finance. And the final point on the bottom, and this is what makes this potential community a bit unique, is that rather than operating in silos or on your own, we have the opportunity to be part of something as part of this community, to act together to do something that's quite big and can kind of set the agenda and get noticed on a national level. You just flick on, Sarah. We know it's not that easy though, and there are barriers that get in the way. And again, what we'll talk about in these case studies and with the presentation of the net zero checklist and the intent of this community is to help you to overcome some of these barriers. So common barriers that exist are knowing what to do. It's a very complex landscape, as we referenced in the quiz. So knowing what steps to take can be a barrier. Then even if you know what to do, knowing how to do it, it takes specialist skills in order to put a lot of this into place that a lot of SMEs don't have, which is quite a challenge. And then the resource, we know that we're operating in quite a difficult commercial climate at the moment. There's a lot of challenges that businesses are facing to stay afloat, never mind to invest in new areas. So resources to get these things done is difficult. So we're looking to support in all of these ways. And part of the value in the checklist that Kate's going to introduce through the case studies is there are lots of things that you can do cost-free to get you up and moving as you start to build towards bigger actions and gain momentum. So Kate, over to you just to introduce the first of our speakers.
Thank you, Ben. And just to briefly introduce myself, my name is Kate Allen and I'm a I'm a partner at EY. I work with both Richard and Ben, but I've also been working with Gareth and the Chamber on driving the sustainability agenda forward in the Thames Valley. I'm delighted to be joined today by 4 panellists who will share their case studies. So firstly, Barney Evans from Turley, Catherine Baird from Syngenta, Neil Trivedi from the Perfect Process Company, and also Ashley Wheaton from UCEM. But before I hand over to them to introduce themselves and to speak a little bit about what they're doing, I'll first talk a little bit about the checklist itself. So this is something that was important to me because I'm a firm believer in the call for action, and also, you know, it's not lost on me that there's plenty to do. But fundamentally, I think that we should be learning from each other and making this as straightforward as possible. There is no one size fits all. Of course, it's dependent on your industry and indeed the company that you work in. But I do think that there are plenty of resources that already pre-exist. And so in constructing the checklist, not only have we kind of set something up that allows you to assess where you are in terms of your journey from a transformation perspective, but also allows and gives practical advice on how you might go about accelerating that. So to bring that to life, I will first hand over to Barney Evans from Turley to talk about target setting. Barney, over to you.
Morning, everyone. Thanks, Kate. I do have a slide. I don't know if it's possible to share it in the background. If not, I'll carry on talking. So yeah, morning, everyone. My name's Barney Evans. I work for Turley. We are predominantly a planning consultancy, but we also undertake a lot of sustainability work, and that's the team within which I work. Most of my work is either working on new developments and around the net zero agenda and all what's required for that, but also working with corporate organisations trying to enable them to make the transition to net zero. And I thought I'd spend my 2 or 3 minutes just noting we're a bit behind schedule. I'll spend my couple of minutes just going through the steps that we use when we work with corporate clients, and hopefully that'll bring it to life a bit. And then maybe in the Q&A we can expand on it because there's quite a lot of depth in there. So there's 7 steps to heaven, if you like, to net zero heaven. I think the first one I would say is the brief. So we've heard quite a bit about net zero. I think, as Ben alluded to in some of his slides, it's a more complicated subject, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on your perspective, than a simple definition. What net zero means can depend what you include within that definition. There's, as well as net zero as an end goal, a lot of policies, things like Science-Based Targets Initiative or the Carbon Real Estate Risk Monitor, which are standards organisations use, have steps that you need to step down as well. So it's not just the end goal. And so it's really important that when you say we want to be net zero, you dive into that and really, what do you mean? What are the requirements? So that's quite an important element to it. The next stage of the work we do with a client is to look at their baseline. So of course you need to know where you are. So what are your emissions that you're including, and travel, processes, your offices, and so on, that kind of thing. And ironically, it tends to be easier with organisations with a lot of greenhouse gas emissions because they tend to be energy intensive and they tend to monitor it. So if you're working for a steel maker, they will know their energy and greenhouse gas emissions very well. If you're working with an accountancy or a legal firm, for example, often, ironically, they know less because energy and greenhouse gas emissions is a relatively small part of their business. So it's quite important because of the obvious cliche that you can only manage what you measure. Yeah. The next stage, and it's really important, and it's been alluded to again in some of the comments earlier, is you need to look at business as usual. So if you're setting a target for your business to be net zero by 2040, say, for example, that's a long time away, and a lot will happen by 2040, whether your organisation does anything or doesn't do anything. And so we look at that, and an obvious issues around there would be electrification of vehicle fleets is often a huge one for our clients. The electrical grid's decarbonising rapidly, which is great. Most businesses have growth plans, so you need to build that in, and these kind of things. So what we do is we say, so you want to be net zero by 2040, but if you don't do anything, this is where you'll be. And you normally get some reduction by 2040 because of what's going on in the wider economy. Then you get to the meat of the net zero transition strategy, and that's where you're doing the analysis and stakeholder engagement. And there's two elements there. There's really 5 things that make that transition. I would say there's energy efficiency is a big one, energy generation, which would be things like solar power, control systems, so controlling your greenhouse gas emissions better, fuel switching, which would be an obvious one, would be electrification of vehicles, and then there's offsetting. And as Ben said, there's this, whether you can or can't use offsetting depends on how you're defining it. A crucial part of this stage of the work is to make sure you're talking to the whole business. So often there's a mistake where you just talk to the energy management side of the business, or you talk to the sustainability team. And of course, you need to make sure that the retail business is involved, or the people doing the work on the ground are involved, so that everyone's bought into this strategy. It doesn't just become a sustainability strategy that doesn't involve the whole business. And so that's been certainly something I've learned over the last 5-10 years, is really engaging with the wider business about what they're trying to achieve as well. And then finally, that will give you results on what you need to do and the most cost optimal way to get to your goal. And then you're into the implementation phase, where you need to have processes for managing it and feeding back what you learn. So often you'll overperform in some areas and underperform in some areas, and that needs to feed back into your processes so you can work out what the next steps are. So that's a really quick run through. I hope that was helpful.
Thank you. Yes, no, Barney, that was incredibly helpful, and it certainly sounds like there's been a lot of learnings along the way. Perhaps, you know, you could maybe just very briefly share, I guess, one of the more challenging areas that you had in getting to where you are today.
So in a personal sense or a business sense, or?
I guess personally, what did you find most challenging about kind of getting everyone on the journey is my question.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, as I said there, I think when you start off in this business, I sort of come from an engineering background, is what I like to do is crunch numbers and do analysis. And you think that's the important thing, is to do the right analysis and get the right results. And what mistakes I've made personally, and I think we've probably made as a sector, is to talk to ourselves too much. And so when I'm working with retail businesses, you need to understand that retail business exists to sell stuff, for example, and you need to engage that wider business. And that's definitely been the biggest thing. So, you know, what are their production schedules? How are you making sure, how are you showing that this net zero helps them retail, not prevent them retailing? So that's definitely been the biggest lesson I've learned over that sort of 10 years we've been doing this.
Great, thank you, Barney, for sharing. That's incredibly helpful. Before I move on to the next speaker, can I just please encourage everyone to be asking questions through the Q&A function that we have on Zoom, please, just because we're going to have a proportion dedicated at the end just to answer any of those questions. So please do ask as they come to mind. So with that in mind, I'm going to hand over to Catherine. Hi, Catherine.
Hiya. So I'm Catherine. I work for Syngenta. For those who don't know, Syngenta is a global agricultural company. So we aim to provide sustainable and innovative solutions to growers all around the world. So my role within Syngenta is I'm a sustainable and innovations communicator. And basically what I wanted to share today was alluding to that cross-functional working that Barney was talking about, is that we can have a strategy, we have a sustainability strategy like most companies do, but actually we need to empower our community, our internal community, about how we're going to achieve that strategy and what it actually means. So essentially at Syngenta, we share case studies within our communities about what different areas of the business are doing to achieve our sustainability strategy, and having that storytelling and bringing that strategy to life. Because ideally we want our people to be motivated and to have that mindset of thinking, how are we going to deliver this? So essentially that's what we try and do, and make people feel proud, because sustainability is a big word, it's a big topic, and I believe it gets thrown around quite a lot. And so we want people to understand it, understand what it means for our business, and essentially ensure that their work is basically providing the solutions for our growers. That's what I wanted to talk about, and we have regular webinars that people on the ground talk about how sustainability is in their work. So we have R&D, we have manufacturing, how we get our products from A to B. And actually they all interlink, and they all have a common theme of sustainability. So we want to share that within our community and have those learnings. So I think that is 2 minutes. I know we are cut short for time, but I think that is an important learning, as in we need to share within our own communities, not just externally, but to make people feel empowered.
I couldn't agree more, Catherine, and thank you so much for sharing. I really appreciate it.
That's fine.
Before you go, can I just ask, Catherine, you know, was there any resistance that you kind of felt from people?
I think so. I think people, a lot of our work, we've always been working towards sustainability and having sustainability within our projects. And I think it was making people realise that that is what they are doing. And I don't think there was any resistance, because people are open to learning and wanting to do better, really.
Yeah, okay, very good. Thank you. Great. So Neil, if you could tell us a bit about the journey you've been on, any barriers you faced along the way, any learnings, please. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Well, hello, everybody. My name is Neil Trivedy, and I'm from the Perfect Process Company. And we coach lean and green business improvement. So my journey started quite a while ago in 2008, when I was coaching one of my lean trainees in Brazil. And she wanted to do a PhD in lean and green. And that's how we developed the green factory concept. And that's really about adding the green factory onto the lean factory, as it were. So really, the core of that PhD is about a 5-step approach to get engagement and action and implementation in green. The first step is really to identify the value stream. That's the end-to-end process from order to delivery. And then the second step is to identify the environmental aspects of that process. And we normally think about power and gas, but it's about everything. So in a factory, you think about rags, oil, coolant, chemicals, and waste as well. Thirdly, it's about measuring all those different environmental aspects to get some hard data on what you're using and also what you're producing, not just for the customer, but also in terms of waste. Step 4 is really where the engagement occurs, because that's where you have what we call the Kaizen event, the improvement activity. And we get the cross-functional team together along with a few experts, technical experts, to actually understand the environmental value stream, identify the priority areas, and come up with improvements with that. And then finally, we step into what we call continuous improvement. The first bit is just to do what you say you're going to do in terms of implementing the actions, and then sustain the change through continuous challenge on the green aspect to make sure that we're continually coming up with ideas to reduce environmental impact. And that feeds into the lean system of continuous improvement and daily meetings. Some of the challenges that we had in that were really about moving from compliance-led environmental health and safety managers, to embed that day-to-day culture, away from that kind of top-down approach. The other one was perhaps leadership support and also business adversity when things change in a business to keep on and sustain those changes. In the past, as I said earlier, I started in 2008. In the early years, there's no real green imperative and there's no real sort of power cost surge. But now we've got those 2 strong levers that help us, make change. And now what we've got is very much, a train that everyone wants to get onto with that. So, one of the real benefits I would say is that the workshops that we ran changed the culture of the business, and people, think about reducing their environmental impact on a day-to-day basis. So I think I've had my 3 minutes now, so I'll stop for any questions.
That's great. Thank you very much, Neil. Despite you kind of sharing your challenges, it's really helpful. You do make it sound quite easy. How long has the Perfect Process Company been on this journey?
Well, personal journey, I've been on this since 2008, and then since we got the book out, I think it's 2013. We've been taking clients on and doing environmental reduction essentially, and I think of late, obviously, it's got a lot more popular, and people are coming to me with their bank account showing me how much they're spending on power and saying, how can you reduce it? And the environmental side of it, yes, it's part of it, but it's the cost of power that's a key driver for business. So that profit element is very important at the moment.
Yeah, Great. And we've also had a question in from Jessica at RBH. So she says they're just in the process of rolling out quality improvement training as part of their continuous quality improvement programme, and would like to catch up on how they embed sustainability themes. So that's less of a question and more of an intention, which is absolutely great, by the way, because one of the key reasons why we wanted to set up this SWG, Neil, as you'll know, is to allow for such connections and make sure we're sharing. So there you go, case in point.
Thank you.
Okay, we've got a couple of questions for the individual panelists, but before we get to those, I will just pass over to Ashley Wheaton of UCEM to talk about contribution to society.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Kate. Really fascinating listening to all the conversation. I'll try and keep within my allotted time. We're the other university in Reading, down the hill from Dylan's institution. And if those of you that don't know who we are focused primarily on built environment professions. We have about 4,000 students studying around the world. Hence, our focus here is on the built environment. But a year ago, my board of trustees made a very important decision that we would focus much more on sustainability. And what you're seeing in front of you is a slide that describes our approach. We call it GLOBE. It is a whole institution approach, and it touches upon every single aspect and dimension of what we do. Our definition, by the way, of sustainability is much more than carbon, net zero and emissions. It encompasses that, but actually, as you can see at the bottom, we've mapped all of our activities to the entirety of the UN SDG framework. We want to be sustainable in all of the 5 dimensions that you can see across our leadership and governance. What we teach, that's really important. We have a huge opportunity to train the next generation of built environment professionals across the way we teach. We are exclusively a distance learning and online institution, so in many ways we have an advantage in that regard. How we operate ourselves, and then a little bit like Dylan, how we influence through research and collaboration. On the right hand side, you can see some of our short-term goals and aspirations. We've embedded this in our core purpose. So effectively what that means is everything we do as an institution now is viewed through this lens, the lens of wanting to be the world's most sustainable university. We'll launch new programs. We're launching a postgraduate program in sustainability for the built environment next year, and more will follow, as well as CPD, which I'll talk about in just a moment. We're setting up a new institute for built environment sustainability. We are looking at our own education model to make sure that it can be as sustainable as possible, and researching the merits of online versus face-to-face. And then, of course, looking at our own operations in terms of scope 1 and 2, and looking at a scope 3 analysis, as well as seeking ISO 14001. If I could go to the next slide, please. It's been brought up a couple of times, how do you find out more? Well, at COP26, we launched a free CPD program. It's called Energy and Carbon in the Built Environment. To date, we've had over 2,500 participants go through that 25-hour program. You can see there it touches upon 5 key topics within the built environment: carbon in buildings, passive and active design, sequestration and offsetting, and then ultimately energy and carbon assessments. We all know the built environment is a big contributor. Some 38% of carbon emissions come from the built environment, and so it can really play its part in getting us to net zero. There's a link at the bottom there, and there's also a very short YouTube overview video. We won't show it today, but if you want to know what that course covers, please do take a look at those. That's it from me, but I'll just leave you with one thought, because Ben mentioned motivation earlier on. This is my favorite quote, and if this doesn't inspire you, then I don't know what will. It's from Robert Swan. He was the first person to walk solo to both the North and the South Poles. He's a climate change activist, and his quote is, "The greatest threat to our planet is the belief that someone else will save it." Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Ashley. Thank you. That's great. I've had a couple of questions through for specific panelists, if I may, which I'm going to jump to just in the interest of time. So Barney, Is the UK planning system and construction industry fit for purpose, in your view, in regard to it being capable of delivering sustainable development goals when it comes to future built environment? It's quite a tongue twister, but I think I think the question is, you know, is the UK system sufficient to support your industry, and what do you think needs to change?
Yeah, okay, thanks. I'll give that a go. So, I mean, the UK planning system has been quite slow to react. I think that the planning system and things like local plans are quite slow mechanisms, almost by their nature. They only tend to get updated every decade or so. So what has been, it is moving. What has moved faster has been building regulations, and that has been driving the new construction sector. I think what's needed to deliver, I'll stick with sort of net zero rather than sustainable development goals, because that's probably a much broader question. Operationally, I think the key is going to be electrification, and that electrification piece is probably the biggest thing that's going to affect us all over our lifetimes, and that is coming into the new build and the corporate clients we work with in terms of electrifying their heating systems, electrifying their transport systems, and so on. There's a lot, and not just in construction, but in the world, where we don't have an absolute answer yet at the moment. So things like steel and concrete, there really isn't a simple mechanism to decarbonise them at the moment. There are very expensive ways to decarbonise them, which probably aren't realistic, but we haven't got a cost-effective way to do that yet, and that's something we're all working on. And of course, sometimes you can use different materials, and sometimes not. So that's definitely a massive challenge, I think, where there is a lot of work going on. So that would be my answer.
Great, thank you. And then a question for Catherine. Just interested in the comment that you made that Syngenta are measuring the sustainability footprint from A to B. Could you tell us a little bit more about this innovation? And then question for us is, can we provide the forum for sharing a little bit more?
Yeah, I guess the bit about providing the forum is, I mean, we've started to share our case studies and stories with the forum on the platform. I know we've shared about a new biodiversity sensor, so a sensor that can basically, you put it in your field and it can track the insects and you can see it from that point of view, and also about nozzles and farmers and how they spray their fields. So we have started to share these stories. And a bit more about the innovation. I mean, so I'm based at Gillett's Hill, which is in Bracknell, which is one of our R&D sites. It's actually our largest R&D site for Syngenta. And a lot of our innovation comes from here. And that's where we can start measuring the sustainability, everything from our infrastructure, as in like how we're going to put the experiments in place, all the way up to manufacturing and on farm.
Great, thank you, Catherine. And thank you again to all of our panelists for sharing your experiences. We've got one final question I'll take for the panelists from Mark. And I think it's a fair challenge, Mark. You know, all of this is very good, but do we think that the same kind of applies to maybe some of the smaller businesses out there? You know, it is very much, you know, we are very conscious of making sure that, you know, the advice that's shared is kind of fit for purpose, and that may not always apply to either smaller businesses or businesses within different industries. Would any of the panelists have a perspective to add on that?
Yes, I would, Kate, if I can.
Please.
Yeah, I mean, you know, just you know, the models that we talk about, or I've talked about, apply anywhere really. It just depends on the type of business. Obviously, I work a lot in factories, so they use a lot of raw materials, resources, and energy, so that you know, the potential savings are a lot higher. But nevertheless, you know, you can apply these to smaller businesses. And I think someone said earlier, you know, in smaller business, you've got more opportunity for changing quicker because you've got, you know, less bureaucracy and less people to worry about, to be honest. So I think smaller businesses can be a lot more agile, you know, in terms of the green agenda, to be honest.
Okay. Maybe just to add to that, Kate, as well.
Yes,
I'd echo what Neil says. Yeah, I mean, all the principles tend to work the same. I'd say if you are a micro business, there's often simplified versions of schemes and so on that would apply to you that remove some of the administration and burden that bigger businesses are able to manage.
Yeah, I guess, you know, maybe the flip side is kind of from an investment perspective. You know, I know some of bigger businesses that I work with, they kind of have a dedicated CSO or you know, department to help deal with things. But I do think that leads us quite nicely into, you know, kind of one of the reasons why we've developed the checklist, as it were, that we'll be distributing after this. You know, we are extremely conscious of that very point that, you know, not everyone will have the resource or indeed investment to allow them to get on the journey, even if they want to. And so, you know, I would encourage you to kind of, when you receive the checklist after this call, really have a read through, because, you know, not only is it just allowing you to measure where you are, but it also provides practical advice and links to free resource that will allow you to kind of help upskill or indeed identify how you might achieve some of your own sustainability goals in a I guess you know, less expensive manner, perhaps. So I think that's a nice way to kind of close this section. And in doing so, I will hand back over to Richard and Gareth for further questions and close.
Okay, thank you, Kate. Really good session that. So we're nearing the end of this now. So we've probably got about 10 minutes just for some broader Q&A, and we've got a couple of polling questions as well. So we've heard from both Ben and Dylan, and both about the business case and the science, and you've heard from our panel in quite an eclectic mix of different situations and perspectives about what's important. So really just you know, if you've got any final questions that have come from this, can you please just put them into the chat or the Q&A now, and we will try and pick them up. Just picking up on one which is coming your direction, Ben, I think, which is just in your view, what are the one or two or three simple things that everyone should be able to just start doing to get themselves on the journey?
Thanks, Richard. To answer that question, I would return to the checklist. And as I was sense checking, we've been inspired in putting this together by SME specific resources and the types of things that you can do. It's very difficult to understand what you need to do in order to decarbonize without understanding your starting point. So it doesn't have to be exact emission calculations, but understanding where the emissions from your operations and from the way you go about things or your services come from, so you can start to put a plan together. Alongside that, developing that understanding, we talk a lot about the business opportunity in this. So what areas are there if parts of your operations or business rely on quite emission intensive type areas? We know that over the coming years, as the UK transitions to a net zero economy, there's going to be less and less value to be had from those areas. So there's opportunity to get ahead of the curve by investing in slightly new areas. So you can also see it as a strategic imperative. I would say, I'm going to stop, I'm not going to go through this whole thing, but I would stop at number 3, engaging your people. And this is again where SMEs have such an advantage over large and more complex organizations, that you can convene your people, get your people together, gather input from your people a lot easier and get them on it. And through that process, you can get everybody thinking and giving the perspective of every department in your organization, how it operates, what things it can be doing. That advantage shouldn't be underestimated. People care, not everybody, but lots of people in your organization will care, and enabling them to care at work, through work, is probably your quickest route to making progress. And it's also a sign that you don't need to do everything yourself. This doesn't need to be leadership locked away in a room working out all the answers. I think number 3, engaging your people, is a very important step in the process.
Yeah, thanks for that, Ben. No, fully agree. We've got a question come through, and I don't quite know whether we'll have a view from the panel or the speakers, but just this is from Sophie, just around the aviation industry. So does anyone have any views of the carbon offsetting and reduction scheme for international aviation, trying to make all international flights after 2020 carbon neutral, or alternatively tackling the inefficiencies in the private versus commercial flights and the different sectors? Just want to check whether anyone's got any views on those, because it's quite a specific question. Barney?
Yeah, hi Richard. So Sophie, yeah, apologies. I mean, I don't know the private versus commercial flights. I don't know if you mean as in we should put more people on the planes so we use fewer flights. That's probably a good point. And I'm not an expert on the carbon offsetting scheme. I think looking at the technical stuff of flights, I think, again, a bit like steel and cement, they haven't really had a way to decarbonise up to now, because there's no conceivable way we'll be using batteries in aeroplanes for long distance flights anytime soon. What is likely to happen is we'll use e-fuels, which is where we'll use very cheap renewable electricity to generate essentially the same fuel that they use now, but capturing carbon dioxide from the air. And I think that's probably the way we'll do it. It's not commercially viable now, but it's coming fast. So I think that will be the solution from a technical perspective.
Okay, thanks, Barney. And I'm sure there must be other people that can help on the Sophie question. Just a very specific question that Peter's asked: where does CSRA as a qualification fit into the mix here? Has anyone got a view on that? Maybe that means we haven't heard of CSRA qualification. Okay, well, that's these other questions we've got coming through. We will follow these up with some answers, assuming we can find answers, which I'm sure we'll be able to. So can I just move to a couple of polling questions, just to get a sense of really two things. First of all, how useful do you think it is from your perspective to be part of a community in the region trying to move the agenda forward on behalf of the region and of the businesses within the region? So Sarah, are we able to throw up that polling question? So if everyone could answer that. And we're just trying to get a gauge here, because it's very difficult to understand with everyone being at different stages of the journey, and you know, going to lowest common denominator won't be of interesting to some people, or similarly going to highest common denominator won't be either. But just be really good to just get a gauge of the people on this call, where you sit on this.
I think that's everyone, Richard.
Is it? Are you able to throw up what the? Oh, right. So from those who've answered, that's a you know, a really strong at one end of the spectrum then. So that's very good to hear. And the second polling question, which is again a really important one to us, and we are going to be following this up with a broader survey across the region, which is, you know, what is it you would really value, which would be helpful to you on your journeys? You can tick multiple ones here, and we know we can't possibly put an exhaustive list, so there is an other there. And if you do end up ticking the other, it will be helpful if you can throw in your thoughts into the chat on that. I'll wait for you, Sarah, to put up and you feel like you've got a good response.
Few people still completing, so I'll give it another couple of seconds. Okay, thank you, everybody.
Okay, so pretty broad spread with some obvious leaders in there. One of the others that someone has suggested on the chat, although they obviously didn't tick the box, was around the importance of lobbying government. But if you think that's important, please do add that in. Okay, listen, that's really great. What I'm going to do now, I just thank everyone for participating but I'm sure Gareth will do this when he finishes, but just I'm going to hand over to Gareth just to explain what some of the next steps are that we're planning as a sustainability working group, and we're really keen to build on this and engage with you going forward and the broader region. So I'll say goodbye now from me and hand over to Gareth, who will just give an update, and then we will finish. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Richard. That's been great, everybody. Again, public thanks to all the panelists, and especially our colleague from EY for hosting. I think also to the attendees, just a big thank you. This has been really great for us. We've had great feedback, and certainly those last couple of questions have really helped us to understand what next and what's planned. And I think this gives you a sort of a sense of our thoughts at this stage, that this is no hard or fast rules here. So again, some people in the questions of how do we get involved in the SWG, we will be following up with you, Philip and I, with phone calls, emails and so forth. But please, this is an open invitation to engage, and we will endeavour to build up this family. As we sit here right now, as Kate has said, today we launch our checklist. That's going to be going live very, very shortly. Hopefully, Sarah, who's working brilliantly behind the scenes, will be getting that up there. A couple of other things I just want to sort of share with you. We talked about our journey and the importance of measuring where we are and where we need to go to. We are minded to put together a State of the Region report. Ben did recognise in our group, we have some really good universities in region. Two of those have spoken today. Royal Holloway also involved in this, and getting that intellectual academic prowess behind what we as business community want to do and achieve. So a State of the Region report will be an informal sort of statement of case of where we're at and where we think we want to go to on those targets towards 2030 and 2050. Again, all this is all volunteer basis, but if you want to get involved in that, please do so. Beacon Initiative, we're very keen to identify a couple of really big projects that we may well look to promote in this part of the world and get ourselves recognised nationally and internationally. That might include, for example, Royal Berks Hospital, who are looking to develop a new hospital. For those that don't know, it was opened by Queen Victoria, so it's about time we had a new one, I think. We may also be working with some of our major motor vehicle companies who are part of our group to see whether the e-vehicles and providing more access points might well be an initiative we can support and grow. The other thing here, I want to just give you a heads up, we will be continuing the work around promoting green technology at a conference that the Chamber will be hosting in May of next year. I think that's going to be at Microsoft's offices in Reading. So watch this space in terms of that. And we will continue, I think the other aspects that was raised by Richard, lobbying government. COP26 has happened, COP27 has happened. I think there may be some challenges that may be upon us in terms of the priority that what Dylan has been talking about and others on the group in government at the moment, perhaps at the expense of growth. But we want to be making sure the voice of business in the Thames Valley is put across to government at every occasion. Next slide, if I may, Sarah. So just some background information. Sarah's put the checklist that's gone live on the website. Here's some more information about the Sustainable Working Group. I think I just sort of in closing, I just want to make sort of a couple of comments really, I think that resonate with me. And Ben quite rightly sort of articulated why it's important to me. I've lived and breathed this for my whole professional life. One of my very first jobs was working for the UN to develop a thing called, that eventually became the Sustainable Development Goals. I was involved in developing strategy around adequate shelter for all, which I think is translated into SDGs 8, 9 and a little bit of 11. So I've lived and breathed this for all my life and will continue to do so. But Dylan talked about a significant change is coming. And the fact that, as a group, we need to be working together at pace to survive and thrive. And I think this region is really, really good to that innovation, the IP-rich business community that Richard has said to me once, twice and 3 times, that drives the economy is super, super important. We can do this for this topic. So this is a call to arms to you, large corporates, industry sector leaders, SMEs, micro businesses across all sectors. Please get involved in in this initiative that we're moving forward. And as I close, I just want to sort of give you a quote from a certain Joe Biden from COP26, where he said, right now we're still falling short. There's no more time to hang back or sit on the fence or argue amongst ourselves. This is the challenge of a collective lifetimes. This is an existential threat to human existence as we know it. And every day we delay, the cost of inaction increases. So let this be a moment when we can answer the history's call, and let this be the start of a decade of transformational action. I think, as a person who's worked in this part of the world for 20 odd years, the Thames Valley and the Thames Valley business community can help deliver that change because, importantly, as Dylan said, we care, we really care. So thank you again on behalf of the Chamber, on behalf of EY, on behalf of all the participants today, and especially to you, our attendees. We'll be in touch, and please get in touch with us. Thank you very much indeed.